When people come in and look at the system, obviously the first thing they see is the halos. The general reaction is, wow, they look really great. They look as if they're designed for the building. They're absolutely perfect. The reaction to the system is almost universally very, very favourable. We find turning on the heating 20 minutes or so before the start of the service is adequate. By the time the service starts, the place is comfortably warm. Our experience to date has been absolutely top rate, and I would thoroughly recommend it. It just does the job. Welcome to St Michael's Church, Winterbourne. My name is Chris Greef. I'm one of the Churchwardens here, and I was involved in the process of researching and eventually choosing our new Herschel heating system. St Michael's Church is a medieval church, over 800 years old, Grade 1 listed. We're very proud of it as a building, lovely situation just outside the village. Unfortunately, about 3 years ago, in the middle of winter, of course, our old oil-fired boiler system packed up. After some work to see whether we could potentially repair the boiler, we discovered it wasn't possible to do so, and the only option with an oil-fired system would have been to completely replace the boiler. We then discovered fairly quickly that under the Church of England's policy on zero energy heating systems, we wouldn't be allowed to put in a new fossil-fired fuel system. And so we started looking at electrical heating options. One of our church members did quite a lot of background research for us, and eventually we, with PCC approval, decided on the Herschel system. The process of installing the system and preparing for the installation, I think, went very well. We had a number of discussions both with Herschel as a company and with the DAC over the types of thing we were thinking about. We explained the different options we had explored, not just the Herschel system, and how we had come to our final decision to go for the Herschel system. That preliminary investigation, I think, made it a lot simpler for us getting final approval, and it all went through very straightforwardly because obviously we were keen to get new heating in as soon as possible. We didn't want to go for too many winters without heating. Our new heating system was installed about 18 months ago now, spring 2024. So here, just moving into the heating system at the end of 2025, we've actually had one full winter season of heating with the new system. We think it has worked very well. It gives the type of heating we were expecting and promised from Herschel. It makes people feel warm, but basically people don't know where the heat is coming from, which is what you want. When people come in and look at the system, obviously the first thing they see is the halos, and the general reaction is, wow, they look really great. They look as if they're designed for the building. They're absolutely perfect in situation. I then nearly always have to explain that they aren't just lights, they are actually heaters as well, because being far infrared, there's nothing visible, and I explain how they work, and even then, they can't really work out where the heat's coming from. They just feel comfortably warm. Members of our congregation who've experienced it on a weekly basis have the same feeling. We find that turning on the heating typically 20 minutes or so before the start of the service, i.e. when the first people arrive, is adequate. By the time the service starts, the place is comfortably warm. We've had various visitors who've come to look at the heating system. They've wanted to see what and hear from us what our experience has been, and they've all been impressed too, about the appearance, and when I've turned on the system for them, the effectiveness of the system. The reaction to the system is almost universally very, very favourable. Another comment I would make as perhaps one of the persons responsible for using the system is one thing that has worked very well for us is the simplicity of the controls for the system. The fact that you've got the varying heat levels and also a critical point, there's a timer on it, so you can't forget to you can forget to turn the system off, but it will turn the system off after a preset time. Invaluable in the light of an experience I once had of finding a church which had been heated all week with electric heaters. So yes, the operation of a system is eminently simple. You can explain to anyone how to turn it on and off, and you don't need to go on a training course or anything complicated like that. Well, having decided to go with the Herschel system in principle, we then needed to think about exactly how we were going to set it up. We had at one time lights down the central aisle of the nave, and so that seemed an obvious kind of arrangement to go for. And given the coverage of each halo, we eventually settled on a configuration where we've got 3 halos down the nave of the church and a single halo in the side aisle where we just have a small block of pew seats, and that gave us all the coverage we needed for the main body of the church. So we settled on the 3 halos in the nave and 1 in the side aisle, looking carefully at the heat distribution from each halo to make sure that that gave us the full coverage we need. And indeed it does. As one would expect, the main heating is downwards, and as you go further away it diminishes, but there is an overlap between the halos, which means that even at the edge of the nave the heating is really quite effective, which means that there aren't any significant cold spots for us, which is obviously important. Working with Herschel on the layout of the halos did manage to give us a system which gave us the heat coverage we need. If someone comes to me and says, what's your experience with the system? Would you recommend it? I would say, well, our experience to date has been absolutely top rate, and I would thoroughly recommend it because it just does the job. It does what it says on the tin.